Call to order the regular meeting of the Haverford Township Planning Commission for October 10th, 2019. Kelly, can you call roll for us, please?
Can. Mr. Capuzzi.
Here.
Mr. Reardon. Mr. Galman.
Here.
Mr. Shannon.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Fiordamundo.
Here.
Mr. Poynton.
Here.
And Mr. Russo.
Okay, everyone stand and in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. We have a couple minor items to take care of before we get into some amendments to the subdivision plan development ordinance. The first is the approval of the component 4A of the sewage planning facilities modules for the subdivision at 1417 Fairview Avenue. This is a request for the approval of one additional EDU for the construction of a new house at that subdivision. So I have reviewed the application. It seems to be complete, and I'll entertain a motion that we approve this planning module component 4A. Anyone want to make that motion?
I'll make the motion that we approve the planning module.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Okay, second application is again for a module 4A of a sewage facilities planning module for the construction of a new home at the subdivision on 1200 Elston Road. Again, it's for one additional EDU for that new home, and I'll entertain a motion to approve that planning module component.
Angela, I have 1400 Elston Road on my agenda. Is that?
1400? Is it 12 or 14?
I apologize. It's 12.
It is 12. I'm sorry. Okay.
There's a typo.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve it.
I'll second it. Second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that motion's approved. I'll sign those and get them to you at the end of the meeting. Okay, Cal?
Thank you.
All right, there's several minor amendments that are being proposed for the subdivision and development ordinance. And Kelly, why don't you lead the discussion on that for us, please?
Sure. The Board of Commissioners Ordinance Committee approached us to make an amendment to a certain section that the way that it's currently worded, and we've all had discussions about this in the past, is for all land development subdivisions, construct sidewalks where pedestrian traffic is going to increase, in the opinion of the Board of Commissioners. We all wanted to clarify that and make sure everybody's on the same page. So basically just amending that section to require sidewalks for all subdivisions and land developments. With that change, we've thought we might as well clean up some other additional language, which we're hoping just to have a discussion about tonight. I don't think anyone's prepared to make any motions or vote on anything, but there were a few other, mostly minor administrative type things that we were discussing, making some amendments to. As far as, where do you want to start? Just go from front back?
Wherever you want to start.
Okay.
Let's just start with this.
Well, right, I wanted to start with sidewalks because that's what prompted the other amendments. So with the sidewalks, we also, let's see. I haven't cut it down yet. some minor language changes just for continuity, changing the wording of established by zoning in one of the sections to zoning chapter, which is defined in that section of the code. Changing some submission requirements for the plans to only require public utilities, drainage, sanitary sewer, public water supply, et cetera, for 100 feet instead of 400 feet for the preliminary plans. There is a section that requires for final plans to, the applicant needs to submit 2 linen or Mylar originals, which I don't want or need, of the final plan, which I think in lieu of that, electronic copies are much more preferable these days. So just a wording change there. Get up with the time.
Kelly, back to the 100 feet versus 400 feet, is that one of the ones that we get requesting a waiver for almost every single time?
Most of these changes are an attempt to cut down the very, very lengthy waiver requirements or waiver requests that we get on a, every applicant basis. That's one of them.
The reason that 400 was asked for originally.
This was last amended in 1993, so no, I could not tell you that answer.
It's probably a carryover from some other ordinance that our ordinance was adopted from. And, you get out some of these places in Chester County where there's nothing
Okay, so
in
maybe
the neighborhood. It's more an idea to get some record of what might exist within a legitimate distance around a large piece of ground. But our township's pretty much divided, and developed. I don't think there's any need to go 400 feet,
the information
beyond.
we need get within 100 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the sidewalk. This is, as I said, most of these are minor changes. There are a few that I think need to be fleshed out a little bit more and just are a thought. One of the other waiver requirements that we get very, very often is for street lighting. It's currently required for all non-residential land development, multifamily residential areas, and at the discretion of the Board of Commissioners for all portions of a certain single-family residential subdivision. Anywhere that, most of our subdivisions are small, within maybe 5 lots at the most, and most of those streets exist and already have street lighting. I wanted to propose that we change that to maybe all major subdivisions. So that way, when we have these 2-lot subdivisions or 3-lot subdivisions, we're not having that same waiver request for street lighting on a street that already has street lighting, especially because we've been trying to limit and cut down on the numbers of streetlights that we have within the township.
And, I'm sorry, a major subdivision is
5 lots.
5 lots or more? Okay.
That's defined.
If it's not defined in ours, it's defined in the PAM.
Okay, so go someplace and find that.
It is defined in
It's
the
defined, good.
Saldo.
Makes sense to me.
And is there any way to work in that the Darby Road corridor can't be ever wavered or waived? Is that?
That's totally separate.
Okay.
That's, part of, hopefully, eventually, when we redo the comp plan, we'll actually have maybe either an overlay that has different requirements for that section. But putting it as a separate section in the Saldo, I think, would just overly complicate things.
Understood.
Further, now there are a lot of sections in the Saldo about the planting of shade trees and tree requirements. The Shade Tree Commission has proposed an amendment, I believe, in its entirety of the shade tree ordinance. So that was tabled from this past Board of Commissioners meeting, but we all still need to kind of go back and forth and compare to make sure that we don't have anything that's conflicting in both of the codes. So there may be changes there. Also, this one also, I think, needs some fleshing out, but where it says, whenever practical, sanitary sewers may be, or shall be installed and connected to this township sanitary sewer system, I think that language needs to be clarified. I believe that the intent of whenever practical is that the sewers are constructed in the road, and not necessarily that there are issues with or concerns about capacity and things of that nature. In another section, in another chapter of the general laws, it does say if there is sewer in that street, you do need to connect. And I think that this was meant to reflect that. So I think that's something that maybe should be considered. And there's actually a couple other sections in there where it continues to say whenever it is practical for that same sewer section. I think that that's all I have. If anyone else has any suggestions or comments or
You think
thoughts.
we should delete the word wherever practical, or just?
I think we need to clarify what we mean by whenever practical. And maybe just borrow or reference the chapter that requires the connection instead of, using the term whenever practical, which is really kind of vague and up to interpretation.
We want them connected.
I think, well, in the other chapter, it requires connection.
Right.
So I
Right.
think that,
The other,
so,
the other chapter says if sewer's within 200 feet, they have to connect.
Yeah, so that would seem,
We just need to make sure there's no conflict between the two chapters.
are we able to use that wording from the other chapter?
Well, we probably could, probably reference it on
we
it.
could say, as required in,
Okay, that sounds fine.
Personally, I would rather keep it, I'd rather repeat it so that you don't have to go thumbing back through the other sections, okay? Only trouble with having it in two places is, if you change one, you have to make sure you change the other.
right. Oh, I'm sorry, I did have one more. Again, for the list of waivers that we always get, in right-of-way and paving widths, where we have streets that already exist, requiring the cartway to be extended or widened in certain areas for, what could be a two-lot subdivision, which might be 100 feet wide. It's impractical, I think, to require that on existing roads, but it was,
I'd rather not change that only because the medical office building up on Cannon Line Road, I think we made a mistake in granting a waiver there. We should have had widen, I forget which road it is, Railroad Avenue, at least along their frontage because they were increasing traffic into that site.
Okay.
So I think we need to keep that as it is. Evaluate the waiver request on a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
Same goes with the right-of-way.
Okay.
The sidewalk, you think we should not be granting the sidewalk waiver?
Sorry? I think the language that being proposed is going to say that you have to put it in.
Right.
But again, because it's in South, the applicants can still ask for a waiver. And we just have to decide again on a case-by-case basis, It's just the wording is wishy-washy.
Right, it invites the
Waiver request, yes.
What about the curbs?
Curbs are required currently.
Well, I feel like there's been, actually, and I think, wasn't it Fairview Road where they asked for a waiver on the
But
curb?
you can always ask for a waiver.
could- okay.
There's already existing language in that same section that requires curbs. Once you get to sidewalks, it says sidewalks shall be required where, in the opinion of the Board of the Township Commissioners, heavy pedestrian traffic will result where pedestrian safety requires such sidewalks. So that's, you know,
That's where it'd be.
in the opinion of.
Right,
and
okay,
we're-
so the
we're-
curb language is already,
Is already there. It
Solid,
already
okay.
says curbs shall be provided
Shall
for all
be, yeah.
existing and proposed streets,
okay.
and goes on.
Say sidewalk can be provided and leave it at that.
Right, basically, sidewalks shall be required for all subdivision and land development.
And I think the times when they've asked for waivers on the curbs is when there's not already a curb on the street. I think.
Generally.
I think Fairview Avenue was the case of using bituminous curb instead of a concrete curb.
Yeah, yep.
I think that's strong.
I agree. I mean, they're still going to ask,
Yeah.
but I think this maybe will help, once you stop making language so permissive, maybe will help.
Yeah, I think you have to be more definitive and directive.
I agree. Actually, I think that's the problem with a lot of the things that we get waiver requests for often, is that we have a lot of permissive language, and just clarifying and maybe even removing portions that we don't need certain things for helps cut down that waiver.
Right.
Do you have any more?
No, that's it. That's all I got.
Okay, I have a couple. The first one that I thought of was the open space requirements and the fee in lieu of. Okay, I think we need to add a paragraph that basically says that, open space is required or fee in lieu of is required if that's what the commissioners want. But if you're having development where that open space or fee has already been paid, you don't have to pay it a second time. Basically exempting subdivisions and land developments that have already met their obligation as far as open space goes. And that'll close the loophole that we encountered with the medical office building.
Can you explain that?
The way the code is written now requires any subdivision which creates two more lots or a land development which is more than an acre in size to provide a certain amount of open space. And there's percentages of the lot area depending upon the zoning classification. And then the commissioners have the option of accepting a fee in lieu of the open space. For a 3-lot subdivision, you really want, open space in a 3-lot subdivision, they would take a fee in lieu of, and the fee is based upon a fee schedule that's in the code. So we had a developer come in who was redeveloping a parcel of ground. There was a building on it already, and they were knocking that down and rebuilding it. And their opinion was our ordinance was incorrect in that it didn't account for re-subdivisions of properties. They thought that it would be like going to the well twice, double dipping into. So our solicitor agreed that the language in the code wasn't acceptable, and instead of having a $50,000 contribution to the open space fund, they donated $5,000 like they were doing us a favor. So I thought it'd be appropriate words added to the code that exempts developments where they've already paid that fee or provided that open space.
Makes sense.
Kind of to close that loophole, if you will. The second item I think what I'd like to see addressed is we had a couple subdivisions where the majority of the lot was steep slope. Okay, so they had enough ground within the building envelope to build a house. Everything beyond that was basically unbuildable per the code because of steep slopes or some other sensitive land feature. So I would like to add something in the code that says, at least 80% or some percentage of the building area of each lot created by subdivision shall be unencumbered by steep slopes, floodplains, and wetlands. And the building area is already defined in the code as the area lot described by the required setbacks within the particular zoning code. So once you have your building area defined, then that area, at least 8% of that area has to be free of all these sensitive land features.
And those are all defined in code, so we know exactly whether they're naturally made or man-made.
Steep slopes, we don't
Differentiate.
distinguish between man-made and,
Would that limit the availability, if that's a word, of the site?
it could,
Restrictions?
it could, yes. I don't know that the Fairview Avenue subdivision could have met that requirement. I
I
forget.
don't think Fairview was the most recent issue.
Walnut Hill?
Walnut Hill. And actually, going back to that, I did want to mention possibly adding for natural steep slope, but without the definition. I don't know.
We don't define natural to
We
steep.
don't, you're right.
So, we tried doing that and that didn't work.
Work out.
And what it does is, if you buy a piece of ground, and you're seeing all these steep slopes, and you want to put a deck in or something like that, then it's another trip to the board for a variance or a special exception or whatever. So we're trying to cut down those nuisance requests to the zoning board by doing something like this. And 80% is the figure I came up with, but it could be 90, it could be 70. It depends on circumstances. But you look at a typical lot that's 50 by 120, 6,000 square feet, you take out the setbacks, there's not a whole lot of ground left, and only have 80% of that ground left isn't much, to deal with. So I think it has to be a relatively high percentage.
Which, and then, after the property is developed, you're essentially giving the homeowner, the future homeowner, a hardship later on for, and, reason to go to the zoning hearing board for a variance because they can't have a shed or widen their driveway or whatever the case may be because of those steep slopes and because of the unusable area.
And then the other thing, and this is more in the design standards, we don't have any criteria for driveways within parking bays, adjacent to parking bays. So I'm suggesting we put in some design criteria for that, as far as, the width of the driveway adjacent to perpendicular parking spaces or angled parking spaces.
Like an aisle?
Yeah, basically.
I would like to hold off on doing the design standards resolution. I do think there might be some other changes to that that's upcoming. So if we could put that part on the back burner. Or, we can,
Design standards?
the design standards, that would be by resolution, which only, requires one reading, whereas the ordinance requires a public hearing and, 2 readings at the Board of Commissioners.
And the only one, I agree with the 100 feet foot requirement for utilities, but our ordinance only says storm drainage, sanitary sewer, and public water supply lines. I think all public utilities with 100 feet should be mapped on the plans. So that would, by adding all other public utilities, we'll fold in, electric, telephone, gas,
Capability on there.
whatever's there. Yeah. And in our township, a lot of those lines are aerial, so it's just a matter of locating the next utility pole down the street or something like that. So what do we want to do here? You're going to work up some magic for us and,
Yeah, at this point, I'll work on a draft and we'll revisit this again. I'd also like to get it over to the Ordinance Committee, but I think we can do that after we've really kind of fleshed out what we want. And I'd like to make sure that I and whomever look through the shade tree proposed ordinance and make sure that we're not, or that they aren't, or we aren't making any substantial changes that are going to affect each other.
okay.
Okay.
Right, and is there any, the commissioners looking for these changes to be made anytime?
No, there's no rush, but they just, would like to see them happen sooner rather than later, but no rush.
This year? Okay, all right. So I would assume by next meeting, we'll have some stuff to pick at?
I do not believe we're going to meet on October 24th, which is our next meeting. So we will try to revisit this on the November, no, actually, we won't. We will be revisiting. I'm not sure off the top of my head when.
Was, we only meet once in November and once in December. All right, does anyone have anything else they want to talk about? I mean, if
We're talking wish list items?
We're talking about minor changes that are,
there's anything in here that,
I don't know if this one is even in the same realm or anything, but like, could we ever consider accessory structure setback revisions, like the 5
that would
foot?
be in the zoning code, and we're not doing zoning code changes.
Right, okay, I didn't know.
Saldo changes.
Okay, all right, I don't know.
The zoning code changes, I plan to do a full, repeal and amendment after the comp plan is complete. It doesn't make sense to do anything that's not emergent right now.
Okay. Stick around for that one.
okay, no minutes to approve? Do we have any minutes to approve?
You know what? I do not have them. No, I do not.
All right, so we'll, if there are some, we'll do it next time.
Okay.
So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
I'll second it.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you.